Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Leadership and Equity as a part of the Rolling Out University. I am Kevin Hooks, your host for today. I would like to welcome our esteemed guest, Melonie Parker. Melanie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so glad to have you. This conversation is part of the Rolling Out University MLK Day celebration and event. We really are, spend a lot of time educating. We want people to spend the day learning not only about the works of Dr. King, but how we can use them in our lives today. Before we get too far down the road, introduce yourself. Tell us about your role at Google and a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Oh, of course. So I am the Chief Diversity Officer at Google. And actually, similar to Dr. Martin Luther King's goals, Dr. King's goals was really to ensure that there's fairness for all and that we deliver on the Constitution in the United States. And my goal at Google is to ensure that everyone is treated fairly, equitably, that everyone feels included and that everyone feels that they belong. And so, I really consider myself the chief steward, not just the chief diversity officer. And our goal is to build sustainable equity, both internal to Google and external to Google.
No, I love that, and I love the way you mentioned Dr. King and his work. It's reminding me of the part of the speech where he talks about he come to Washington to cash a check, and how it's marked insufficient funds. And I think part of your role is to figure out ways that through your organization, people have the opportunity to have the funds deposited properly in that check of equity. So, talk about some of the work that you're doing that you're most proud of.
So some of the work that we're doing really is for equity and not equality. And just to make sure we're all on a level playing field in this conversation when we talk about equity, equity is really ensuring that everyone has like equal participation. And to do that, we may need targeted strategies that go over and above to ensure that certain populations are situated at parity. And so
Mhm.
equality would say we'd have like an equal approach across the board, but for groups or communities that fall below the average, that still would make sure that they were able to come up. So if we think
Mhm.
about where communities are situated, that would tell us like what's the equitable approach or strategy in order to do that. And so with that, one of the most what my proud, not just
Mhm.
moment, but work at Google has been our racial equity commitments. And so, following the murder of George Floyd, we went on a 100-day sprint as a company, really deepening the work around racial equity globally, not just in the
Mhm.
United States. And we set 8 goals that looks at equity both internally and externally. So we looked at our products, we looked internally at our approaches with the same goal of ensuring sustainable equity internally and externally. And so we report out on our progress quarterly. I just released a blog at the end of the year that marked the end of our second year towards our 2025 goals.
No, I love that the idea of sustainable efforts. So many companies after George Floyd and the media hype sort of died down. They started having diversity and inclusion fatigue. They started, what I call entering into a space of diversity recession. So what do you do to make sure that you continue the momentum of this incredibly important work?
It's such an important point that you've touched upon that actually it's one of the things that's a threat to the work is how do you sustain the momentum. And if you think about the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging, it doesn't follow the bell curve that we were all taught at business school, right? So we were
Mhm.
taught that business goes up and then it comes down on the down. What are you going to do to reiterate? But if you think about in our lifetimes, Kevin, we're on the up. I don't see where we're going across, certainly where we're going down, and who comes into that frame of being underrepresented continues to grow and to expand. And so, as we're continuing to make this climb up the hill, well being, attending to our own traumas, recognizing where we might be. Like myself, I'm both a contributor and a consumer of the work as a Black woman. How am I ensuring that I am sustained individually, but collectively as well?
No, that's fantastic. And you touched on something I feel like we don't give enough pay enough attention to: accessibility. Companies, 100% of us are doing diversity work in Fortune 500 companies, and really, some companies are doing some great work. And just like anything, some aren't so good, but some are, and some are. But accessibility, only 4% have a really concerted strategy toward universal access. Talk about some of the work that you're doing in that space because it's so important.
Accessibility is so important. One of the things we have to realize is intersectional. Like we're not
Absolutely.
monolithic identities. We don't want to flatten each other.
Hmm.
Accessibility means that people have the equal opportunity to access not just workforce but workplace.
Hmm.
If you look behind me as an example, that's a photograph of a Black woman, not a painting. And this was
Hmm.
using true tone technology on Google's Pixel,
Yeah.
which
Hmm.
ensures that people of all skin tones can show up. Like for some of us, as we've gone on all of these video calls, we don't show
Hmm.
up well, or we have
Right.
blinding lights in our faces trying to ensure that people can see us, to be seen and to be known. And that's exactly what we're doing with accessibility, making sure that, all of your abilities um, are actually equal factors.
No, that's great. You touched on image, and image equity is so important. In fact, the work that you guys are doing with Real Tone for Pixels, the work you're doing with Dr. Ellis Monk from Harvard, and his incredible research and effort for the last decade or so on skin tones. I really think it's something that should be applauded. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work and how you see that impacting the work down, us as a society in the future?
Well, number one, like we all have like this primal need to belong, like we're joiners, but to do that, we have to be seen and we have to be known. So, what we're doing with Dr. Monk is incredibly important because it's allowing people to show up as who they are,
Mhm,
and that you're depicted with technology that shows
mhm,
your true skin complexion, your true skin tone. The cool thing is, we've been able to use our own employee resource groups as testers across the
mhm,
wide spectrum of skin tone colors and
mhm,
hues, and we get feedback from our employees on, are we doing that well, are we not doing that well. And so we have about 40,000 employees that participate in one or more of
wow.
our 17 employee resource groups. And so we use our own employees to help test out these initiatives and to give us feedback as well.
Wow, 40,000. That's amazing. And
I mean, globally.
you think about the kind of data you can gather from a large swath of people from all walks of life. I mean, I just think that's amazing. So, and the other thing I think to touch on is the importance of ERGs in that process inside of organizations. How do you get, what kind of work and effort do you put into creating evangelists out of the ERGs and having people participate?
We have such an incredible group of Googlers, and we call our employees Googlers, and that really come together with similarly situated employees that are looking for like that shared affiliation. And our ERGs do a lot of work together. So what I do on my global team, I have what I call community advisors that work with each of our
Mhm.
employee resource groups to help understand like what are they doing in terms of goal setting, how do we help with like different events that they're doing, and how do we bridge across all communities. And then, of course, we support Heritage Month celebrations as well.
Yeah, no, no, that's really great. I think about just, so often we forget about the importance of people at all levels in our organization in building these platforms and the work that we want to
It's true.
do.
And
Um,
leadership. I mean, if you
yes.
think about it, sometimes our own employees, their first leadership role might be an employee resource group. Like you could
Right.
be like brand new Googler right out of college, and you can come into an employee resource group and you can lead a committee, you could lead various initiatives, and you're getting leadership, but you're also expanding your access and your network across the company with people that you may not run into in your normal day to day. So there's so much that
Mhm.
happens inside of the employee resource group.
So, what do you tell people like who are considering joining one of these resource groups? Because like about the value to their personal brand of participating, if there is any.
I talk about what I just said about the
Mhm,
leadership, the opportunity to expand network,
mhm,
shared affiliation,
mhm,
really having the opportunity to share space and community with people, who are similar to you
mhm.
is really important. And I think an elephant in the room, Kevin, is that sometimes people don't want to participate in employee resource
Right.
groups because they
Mhm,
don't want to be affiliated, with the Black group or the
mhm,
women's group or whatever their identity is. Like, is that going to have some negative backlash to me? And
mhm.
so there's a lot of those types of concerns that we have to continue to overcome as well. That no, it's okay to come together, across shared meaning, shared affiliation, and get strength and to expand network, and that helps you be an even better Googler, as well.
Right, and it's funny. I mean, it's interesting. You talk about women's group versus African Americans, or whatever the term, whatever the affinity is. One of the things I really counsel the organizations that I support in doing so is making sure if there is a women's particular affinity group, make sure there's men participating.
Yes,
Make
men
sure
as
there's people.
allies. Yes, I agree with
Right.
you.
So, what kind of successes have you seen in that? And I'm sure it's a work in progress, but how inviting people to participate in an affinity group that may not represent themselves, but that we want them to, have an allyship by participation.
Actually, across all of our employee resource groups, we have allies that are part of either the email alias that join the events. So,
Mhm.
it really is such a strong spirit of allyship at Google. And we actually have a curriculum on allyship. So, people who want to know how to show up, how do you share or extend like your privilege to another group, and so we're giving like tools and tips to be able to do that. One of the things, though, that we do when we come together in solidarity, there are some spaces where we may ask allies to join like a live stream so that we can save live spaces for the community members themselves. And so that teaches respect. It also like gives insight in a way that allows the space to be sacred for the community as well. And so I think all of these are skills that just help us care for humanity and to, love our fellow man, which is really what Dr. King is, all about in his life's work.
Yeah, that's great. So how do you combat performative allyship when people are just going through the motions for a host of reasons? But how do you combat that so to make sure it's really authentic so you get the results that you really want?
How we try to combat that is really by talking about what allyship is. We talk about and really try to model how to share privilege, your privilege to another
Mhm,
group. We do this by having our employee resource groups work with each other. They send notes of support to each other. And so
mhm,
it's more about how do you crowdsource performative allyship, because people need to be in
mm,
situations where they're able to recognize for themselves
mm.
that it is performative, if that's what it is. Sometimes people are performative, they just don't know another way, they haven't seen
Right.
like a healthier approach. So
Mm,
role modeling, building competencies and capacity, to be an ally or a sponsor is really important, because if
mm,
you think about most underrepresented groups, particularly Black and Brown, it's lack of access to networks. And so if we can help with all of our employees showing up as better allies and also better sponsors, we're going to really expand that access and the networks that are there.
Yeah, all right. So I'm gonna adjust this conversation just a little bit if you don't mind, because I'm sure people in the audience are trying to figure out, well, how do I get paid? How is this work gonna help me inside of my organization? One thing we know is that mobility inside of an organization breeds retention. So does participating in this kind of work that is not quote my job help people find opportunity for growth and promotions and more money and things like that?
Yes, it absolutely does. And so, first, you do want to take care of your job. But
Right.
if you come into a company and you're gaining access to employees and colleagues that you ordinarily wouldn't have access to, you're actually like getting to know people in a very different way. You're letting them know what your professional interests are, about your development track and journey. And then when these opportunities come, more than likely you're going to hear about them before they hit any formal system for application. And that's going to give you certainly a heads up for those types of opportunities. And so it's how we expand our networks and expand who we know becomes critically important, and not just in our professional lives, but our personal lives as well.
Yeah, no, and I love that. I really do. So that's the internal answer to the question. Externally, I know you guys are doing some incredible work with like the Black Founders Fund and the Institutional Research Fund and things like that. Talk about ways that people can take advantage of the resources that you provide that are specifically driven because of your commitment to diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. So growwithgoogle.com. So through Grow with Google, there's free resources. So there's access to digital career coaching. We have Google career certificates. We use Coursera as a platform. Our career certificates are accepted by more than 250 like different employers in addition to Google. And then that's also where information about our Black Founders Fund, where we provide support to Black startups, Black
Mhm.
founders. We're in our second cohort year now. I was over in London a couple of months ago and celebrated a graduating dinner with our European and our African small business founders. And, those are just some of the ways that you can tap into the resources that we're making available.
No, you know what? I'm gonna call you out being so casual. I was in London and we were hanging and we were going like people for you for young brothers and sisters out there that really want to be able to find themselves in a position like that. Can you tell them a bit about your journey, your personal journey that got you to this role, and how maybe they can emulate that someday through hard work and obviously through education and knowledge, etc. But talk about your journey a little bit because I know that there's some great nuggets that people can pull from that. Because I want to be able to say I was hanging out in Switzerland and Geneva yesterday, and
I do have a global role, so
yes, I know, I love
there are expectations that I fulfill all those duties and all of those places. But agreed, very, very cool. But my brother and I are first generation college. So my mother
it.
worked at a bank and then later at the post office. So she was a postmaster of like a very small office in North Carolina. And my father worked in furniture factories his whole life. And my parents made a lot of sacrifice for my brother and I to go to college, and I'm the younger of the two of us. My brother went to Johnson C. Smith, and I went to Hampton. And my parents,
Hey.
well, yes, my parents were in the Air Force, so we were built and really developed on a life of service. And what does that look like in the community? And so when I came out of Hampton, I worked at the Charlotte Observer in Charlotte, North Carolina, selling advertising. I worked at a public relations firm, BNC Associates, led by a Black man, Robert Brown, who actually did diversity with the Nixon
Right.
administration.
Mhm.
And he's such a positive mentor in my life. And then I went to Lockheed Martin and worked. I was at Lockheed Martin for over 17 years in a variety of roles. And so I think this is critically important. Every 2 or 3 years, but more in the 2 years, I I was changing jobs, and I was
Mm.
in like a talent development program that allowed me to rotate. But what those rotations did, it pulled me out of a comfort zone, put me in a different environment, put me in a different business area or a different part of human resources that allowed me to build like my breadth of skill set. And so that breadth also allowed me to build like network as well. And the final role that I had in my career at Lockheed Martin was I led HR and communications at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And just a brief story that I think is really important. One of my mentors called me one day and said, Melonie, you're going to get a call about the vice president of HR role at Sandia. And don't say no. Like, just call me later.
Right.
Boss is going to try and talk you
Mhm.
out of it. Melonie, don't say no. So it played out exactly as he said. The gentleman that I worked for gave me a call, said, Melonie, your name came up to go lead HR at Sandia. You don't want to do that. I have a career track for you. And I shocked him because I said, actually, I want to hear more about it. Like I'm interested to
Mm,
learn more. But this was a leader that I trusted. And had this mentor not given me a call, I would not have pursued it because I
mhm,
knew that my leader had my best interest at heart. And so,
mhm,
mentorship, championship, sponsorship is
mhm,
critically important when people are in rooms and places that you're not, who have a higher level view than you do. And I did interview for the Sandia role. Subsequently, I was selected for the role. And the 2.5 years that I spent in Albuquerque were some of the best years of my career that
mhm.
gave me certainly, an access and development that I would not have been able to get inside of Lockheed. And then I left Sandia and I came to Google. And I've been at Google for about 5 years and in my current role about 3.
No, you know what? That's so fantastic. I do want to touch on that. But you mentioned Bob Brown. I served on the National Urban League Board of Trustees with him, and I also
Amazing.
so amazing, amazing, amazing. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on when you brought that up, you started to touch on a little bit. We got to do a deeper dive on the importance of mentorship and
Yes.
co-mentorship. Can you talk about some of the work that you're doing in Google, really to drive home that? Because one thing I think we don't do enough of a good enough job is explaining to people the value of that mentorship both ways.
I will. Let me talk about this exciting program that has come out of our racial equity work, and it's called the Collective. So, one of the things that we realized as we were on our 100-day sprint, deepening our work in racial equity, is that when we looked at, the Black Googlers that joined, there was something that wasn't happening, that in that stickiness that needs to happen between when you first join a company and you get over not just the first 90 days but like the first like 12 to 24 months. And we developed a 6-month onboarding program for all Black Googlers, and the program is called the Collective. And as a part of the Collective, you self-elect that you're going to join
Mhm.
that program at all levels. So, from a new college hire to vice presidents. But your manager, you decide if you're going to invite your manager or not to join that program. And then you're assigned a mentor as a part of that. And we're about to graduate our second cohort early
Mhm.
next year. And when I stood in front of the group in the fall, I can't explain like just the flood of emotions in being in community with people that we had prayed for, designed for, curated for, who had a better experience because of the mentors that they were assigned, the
Mhm.
attention that went into the program, but also the training that went to their managers as well about what does it mean to uniquely lead a new Black employee at Google.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. So how does that work? The studies I've read is we're talking about 35% of our economy is projected to be participants in the gig economy and or freelancers. We're talking about over half of, 540 million people worldwide in the gig economy. Like that's going to be a huge number, but it's going to impact our ability to really, unless we're intentional, to utilize things like mentorship. What are some of the things that you're doing to make sure that you guys are best positioned to do just that?
Well, one of the things that, and then I want to go back and dovetail back a little bit deeper on mentorship for myself
Mhm.
personally, but one of the things that is really important is culture. And you heard me talk about
Mhm.
belonging, that every employee, in order to feel like you belong at a company, the research shows that you have to feel supported, rewarded, recognized, and valued. Like
Mhm.
those are the essential elements for people to feel that they belong. But that goes back to like the culture of the company. And we all, like the amygdala, is this where
Mhm.
fear comes from? We all want to join. Like it's just a
Mhm.
natural part of our psychology to be joiners. And so we have to make sure that we have these environments that are supporting, rewarding, supporting, and valuing, so that when people come in, you want to
Mhm.
join and you want to stay connected. Otherwise, you feel like you're othered, right? So there's belonging and
Mhm.
there's othering. So we pay a lot of attention to the science behind belonging. We work with John Powell, who is the director of the Institute of Othering and Belonging at Berkeley, and he really helped. Was a key partner that helped develop our belonging approach and our belonging practices. And you can go to belonging.google.com. Mentoring becomes a key part of that, and not just for the person that's being mentored, but for that mentor as well, because the
Mhm.
mentor is also learning about themselves. They're getting key insights and they are growing and developing too. And so when we're able to find mentors that are different than who we are, it's a richer experience, although it could be awkward in the beginning.
Yeah.
And, for myself personally, and I've said this before, the first mentoring program I was selected into at Lockheed, they gave me a black woman, assigned me a black woman mentor. And I was like, no, I said, I have access to black women all day long. And I said, could you assign me a white male? Because I actually had
Mhm.
been around a lot of white men. I wanted to get mentored by someone who had a completely different background and
Yeah.
culture than me. And it was a rich experience, but not just for me, but for my mentor. His name was
Mhm.
Shaq as well, who gained so many insights about Black women.
It's funny. That's such an important point. You're talking about Black women in the workplace. Last month, we added somewhere around 250,000 jobs to in our economy. Challenge is that the only segment of our economy that saw unemployment rates rise were Black women. We also know that Black women are most ambitious, tend to be more educated, but have the biggest challenges in the workplace for mobility and growth. And so as a Black woman leader, what kinds of things, the pitfalls and blind spots, when we can lean in and when we can't. Can you give some advice to sisters that are really looking for opportunities to get past those hurdles that are inherent in these systems?
Yeah, so the first thing I say is, know where you add to the culture. Like it's not about culture fit, it's really about culture add. What's your superpower?
Mm.
Like what do you bring that no one else can bring? And you do want access to a network of peers that you matriculate through the company with, but then you want like a cadre of mentors across various identities that sit in places that you don't, that provide you with experiences and coaching across areas that you don't have exposure to yet. And then you need someone that I call a screen buddy. And we don't talk about this enough. You need
Mhm.
somebody that if there's something that happens that is really troubling you, you can actually reach out to them and you can scream and they'll make sure that your crown is all, nice and neat and balanced before you
Mhm.
walk back out again. But that's important. And that's not everybody. It's a very special person that can keep confidences and that has your best interest at heart. And then you're able to do the same for the other person.
I just want you to know, I'm gonna steal Screen Buddy as a term. I might even give you credit the first time I use it, but I got to be honest with you. I'm gonna act like it's mine from
Go
now
for
on.
it. Go for it.
After,
Go for it.
because
It's important. We don't talk about it. We
that
need
is
somebody to scream
tremendous.
with. Yeah.
All right, so listen, as we wrap this conversation up, because I think It's been fantastic and rich. I got some real rapid fire questions. So
Okay.
I want you to let's just hit them first thing that comes to mind. At the end of this year, I would have been successful if I did what?
I would have been successful if I more than doubled the Black population at Google as a part of our racial equity commitments.
Wow, I love that. So who do you want, who would you praise? If I said you could praise one person for their work in diversity, equity, inclusion, who would it be and why?
It would actually be Michelle Obama because,
Wow.
the mantle that she has taken on, the communities that she serves, including our young people, and the role model that she is, has made such an incredible difference and an impact for Black women across the board and all communities.
Yeah. When you're finished your work at Google or just ready to retire and drive right off into, I don't know, one of them great islands that you get to gallivant across, what is it you want them to say, people to say about your work at Google in diversity, equity, inclusion?
I really want people to say that I made a difference. I want people to say that, I helped forge a path for others to walk on, that, the work that I've done has become a bridge, not just across differences, but for people to be able to do their best work.
I love it. Last thing, what does Dr. King mean to you? And then follow that with a way that we can reach out and follow your great work.
So, what Dr. King means to me is that I actually can make a contribution bigger than myself to really reach humanity, to extend love to those that I don't know, and to make this world a better place. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. Just follow me at Melonie Parker.
I love it. Thank you so much, Melanie. I love this conversation. We have to do it again. I'm going to invite you on my show, Equity in Focus, which is a part of the Rolling Out platform as well. But I love this conversation, and we've got to keep it going because it's so important. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, on this episode of this part of Leadership and Equity as a part of the Rolling Out University. You can watch this on demand at any time, but thank you for joining us. We're going to bring you more great content like this in the future. Thanks, everyone.